Hey, everybody. Today we have for you podcast number 127. Today's podcast is titled, Do You Remember Where You Started From? Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. We are Dr. Peta and Sandy Lombardi, and this is the Limitless Life Network podcast where we flesh out the limitations that are preventing you from reaching your goals and living the life that you are called to lead. And a great week that we've had. Had a lot of fun this weekend, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun at in the North Country at the Inlet Fire and Ice Festival with our family. So shout out to the people in Inlet. I don't know if there's anybody up there that listens to the podcast, but they did a great job. Enjoyed some fireworks. A lot of fun with the family. And we want to thank the listeners from not only listening but also commenting. I know Sandy received, we both received because I read it too. A very nice comment after last podcast about how the topics that we talked about that we actually borrowed from Jeff Snyder's message that he delivered at church, just how it meant something to that person, right? And how it really helped them in their life. So shout out to Ross for thank you for letting us know that you're listening.
Yeah.
It means a lot. So yeah. Anything else you want to say?
No, it's just great to get your feedback and to see how it is applying in your lives personally and like your work environment and relationships and developing for other people. So it's great, the trickle effect.
Yeah, trickle effect. So this week's title, do you remember where you started from? And, kind of inspired by Pastor John's message this week. Talked a lot about change. Our church is doing a lot of things this year. We just got through a couple weeks of prayer and fasting, and there's a lot of change happening, a lot of growth. It's exciting, and with that comes, it's very important to step back and really listen to what the Holy Spirit wants, right? And so I think that's a really good thing. But he talked about change.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that really inspired this week's message? Anything you can think of?
I guess some of our time with Timothy, which we'll get to that, but he joined us this weekend. He's been working now 2 weeks cutting hair in a barbershop in Rochester. So some of his new experiences, I guess, gave us some content today as well.
Yeah, I think I was waiting for you to come up with that.
Okay. Glad I covered that.
I was hoping you'd pull that out. Gave you a lead in. You got it. You got there. Nice job. Okay, so number one. What's number one?
Change is a sign of growth and a sign of life.
Yeah, so we've all gone through, as we've grown, we change. Our bodies physically change, right? You go from the infant and all the way up through, we change physically. And as we continue to mature and grow, we change in a lot of different ways. But as you become an adult, you get into habits and patterns, and you may notice that you can become stagnant at times. And if you notice, as people get older and older, they resist change more. That's because their life is getting smaller and smaller, and their time is getting shorter and shorter. And that's the inevitable, is that time is on this earth is going to be limited for everybody. But with that, you can be you could be a senior saint that has lots of growth and lots of change still happening in your life, and that is a sign of life and a sign of you living a bigger life. So a life that you're called to lead, which I think is part of the title of the podcast. So encouragement will be to embrace change and not to fear change. But not all change is good either, is it?
Right. No, like we talked, if there's no, I guess, reason, like you don't just institute change for the sake of instituting change, right? There should be a reason behind that. And we talked, Pete and I, as we were preparing for this, like in business, when we're seeing growth in an area, the instinct is often to try to do a bunch of stuff, to keep the growth going. And often we've been coached that the best thing is just keep doing what you're doing and don't change a thing. So there's times for change and there's times for to not change. But
Right.
if we resist change throughout our life, then we're not going to grow.
Right. It's very interesting when you talk about business because I think of my father and uh, his chiropractic career. He had change early on in his career as he was growing, but for the latter part of his life, he resisted change. He still had the dial phone, in the office, the old black phone that you had to crank the dial,
Mm-hmm.
and and with that, there was a lot of stagnant. It just, the decor didn't ever change. It was circa 1962.
Mm-hmm.
It would just yeah, so there wasn't a lot of growth happening there, but still served, still loved people and so forth. I'm not judging it. I'm just saying, like, I remember that just kind of struck me
Mm-hmm.
as how he didn't make a lot of change. And then my brother Paul, his office was always getting remodeled. His entire career, it was always being updated. Every time I'd go visit my brother in Florida, his office would have a
Mm-hmm.
new look, and I'm like, wow, he changes his thing around a lot. But it's a vital practice to this day that he sold, so
Mm-hmm.
that's probably why. Yeah. So that brings us to point number,
2, campers and climbers.
and this is a whole, I guess, metaphor for change and for growth. And I learned it a long time ago. I don't know where, at some seminar somebody was talking about that. Is like when you scale a mountain, there's times when you're climbing, and that's how business can be. That's how life can be. It seems like, when you're raising a family, there's a lot going on and you're working hard, and the family is growing, and your career is developing and a lot of things are happening, and then you get to a point where you can't take anymore. You can't continue to grow and change anymore, so you just kind of hang out in that area and you set up camp, and that's kind of where you do life. And when you're doing life in that camping stage, it's also a time where maybe you're getting ready to move to the next stage, to start a climb again. You're preparing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So before you can break camp, you have to be prepared for the climb. So you have to break everything down, and you have to pack your packs, and you have to be ready to live out of the backpack while you're climbing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is life, is that there's times when you have a big growth spurt, and then there's times when you have to rest and recharge before you can grow again. And you have to live in at that altitude, at that level that you've climbed to, before you can ever go any further.
I can think back to of times when we were in extreme times of growth of climbing, and we needed wisdom sometimes from outside of ourselves. It was that we needed a few days to camp, just
Mm-hmm.
a short season of camping to restore and then to keep growing with that growth period. But so
Mm-hmm.
being very in tune and listening to whatever the wisdom is coming in for you, but you can climb and climb and climb, but there's always going to be that time for like a rest.
Yeah. And another thing that you can think about with that analogy too is that sometimes you climb to an altitude that you're not prepared to live in.
Mm.
You're not prepared to camp in that harsh of an environment, and you have to go back down where it's safer. And there's nothing wrong with that. Smart, right?
Mm-hmm. Right, not to see it as a failure of,
Exactly.
yeah.
But I mean, if you were to climb to an altitude and try to survive where you eventually would perish, that's not intelligent. So you have to withdraw, and sometimes it's an intelligent move to get out of the bad weather, to get away from the stresses, and dial it back. And a lot of times people do that later in life. They downsize things, and they simplify things. It's not right or wrong. It is what's required.
Mm-hmm.
But what's guiding everything, and are you making decisions on whether you're climbing, camping, or even descending, based on your personal feelings, or are you making those decisions based upon what God has planned for you? Are you following are you following that calling? Are you
Mm-hmm.
listening to the Holy Spirit in that regard?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, thanks. What are you thinking? What?
Um,
You're thinking what?
then, so I guess point number three, new inspiration can produce new growth if and only if.
Hmm. So, yeah, we talked about last week about how two people can listen. Was it last week? We talked about two people can hear the same thing, and
Mm-hmm.
one's moved and one isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a new inspiration can produce new growth. And it might be an inspiration or it might be information too. It could be new information. And it can produce new growth if and only if it's something that you actually fully embrace, fully believe, fully make a part of your life and your core. So when we surrender to an idea or a piece of information and we fully take it in, it changes who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, because it changes you on the inside, it will change how you look at everything on the outside. It will change your actions. It will change your behaviors. It will change just your perceptions and how you take everything and how you interact with everything. I used to use a picture of what's called a cognitive illusion to try to illustrate this point about how we can look, two people can look at the exact same thing and see something totally different. And a cognitive illusion, if you look up one online and you look for an image of a cognitive illusion, there's one with a rabbit and a duck. You look at that picture and looking at it one way, it looks like a rabbit, but if you look at it a different way, you can see a duck. And some people can't see both of them, they can only see one until somebody points out the other.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole point of that cognitive illusion is to get everybody to understand that it's possible to have two things occurring at the same time, but we don't see things the way they are. We see things the way we are from our own perspective, our own lens. And and I guess that really is important because when you add new information and you add a new inspiration and you allow that, if it's something you truly believe you and you allow that to permeate your being and who you are, that's how we're changed. And that's how God changes you from the inside out and allows you to go beyond what you've ever been able to do before.
Mm-hmm.
And allows you to venture into a place that is for his glory, not for your own. And I'll tell you, it's a wonderful, peaceful feeling. Actually, it's exciting but yet peaceful at the same time because it just feels right.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, we didn't talk about this, but we have a life group. We meet on Wednesday nights, and our conversation this past week with one of the gentlemen, Justin, and we were talking about how he was saying how the word, we're reading in Revelation, which he's read before, but he was just saying how so much of this he understands now and is looking at it in a different light, and it's bringing different um, changes in him and therefore in his family and the direction he's leading them. And we got talking, like it's about maturity. And he said, you know where I was in my walk, none of this really connected. It wasn't making sense to me. So
Mm-hmm.
um, it's different. He's got a totally different perspective now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Yeah, so I think that point number four is a really it's the crux of the title of the podcast today. So
Mm-hmm.
point number four is your origin story matters. You want to start with that one?
Yeah, we were discussing Saul in the Bible and his conversion to Paul and his life of um, condemning and persecuting Christians, killing them to stop the advancement of the way, right, in Roman times, and his conversion, his interaction with God, and how that changed his mission. And but he never forgot where he came from and
Mm-hmm.
who brought him out of that and what his new calling was. And so one of the things I was saying to Pete, I witnessed this weekend in time with Tim was, he was telling us about some of his clients that he had, and this young boy that the mom brought in, very shy and uneasy, and immediate. I don't know. They discovered that they both liked Legos. Timothy loved Legos when he was a young boy, And so he was talking with this boy, the entire time of his haircut, all about the different things. And the mother stopped him after about how he had connected with him. And then, even more so, there was this a woman called to see if anyone in the shop would take on her elderly father who hadn't been groomed in a long time. He'd been ill, and she said his hygiene was poor, and just gave them the scenario, and was anyone willing to see him. And Tim scheduled with him, and it just like he shared how great a time he had with the gentleman and the family. And I just realized, like, God is using Timothy, and he's always had this compassion and for anyone. He never saw differences in people. He didn't have a lot of like the social cues that we develop, and he just had this innocence towards everyone, and that's still there. And I just kind of marveled in how God is using that in him as an adult, and just loving on people and pouring into them. And I was thinking, God can refine any skill. Like, Tim doesn't have master skills yet in barbering, but God's using the core of what he's developed in Tim, and that compassion for people and love for people. And he could do that in anything, and he will refine Tim's barbering skills. So I just think if we use this, the inner tools that God has given us, like, he will refine the rest.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
he's refining the inner side, but like that's first.
Yeah, it's funny because you, if you were to ask other people their opinion, you don't even have to ask. People are very quick to volunteer opinions. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you noticed that. But people will volunteer their opinions, and they will oftentimes, and I'm guilty of this with my own kids sometimes, is that I see the weaknesses, I see the limitations, and others will see limitations, and those limitations really don't matter,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like he's not the perfect barber yet. He doesn't have a ton of experience, but that doesn't stop him. Don't tell him he sucks. Like he doesn't. But I'm just saying, like, don't tell him he's a terrible barber, because that doesn't. That's not the whole point here. The whole point is, like, maybe he's not great at like math skills or something we're not great at. But like, think of Paul. Like, people could have said, well, Paul, but you persecuted Christians, and he's like, but that's my point. My
Mm-hmm.
point is that I was wrong in what I was doing, and God changed me, and I'm here to testify about how He has changed me. And it never stopped him, no matter where he went. Paul was successful in converting people to Christianity and to sharing and spreading the good news. He was successful wherever he traveled because he never forgot where he came from.
Mm-hmm.
He never forgot his origin story. And you have one too.
Mm-hmm.
Think back when you were a teenager and all that you've gone through to where you are today. Maybe you're a teenager listening. Think about where you were when you were a little kid and to where you are today, and what God has been walking with you, trying to
Mm-hmm.
get your attention the whole time,
Mm-hmm.
right? He's been there aside you the whole time, trying to, and you've matured and you've grown. And guess what? You're going to continue to do that.
Right.
But everything that you've walked through with him is part of your origin story, and it really matters.
Yeah.
It really matters as to what you're about to go into next.
Yeah. You typically is preparing us.
It's preparing you, but it should give you confidence and the courage to go forward.
Mm-hmm. That really relates well to point number 5, which is acknowledge the acorn. And we're definitely taking this from Pastor John this Sunday. And it just really spoke to both of us. Like, he was saying, we have prayers that we want to happen. We're praying for something to change in our lives. And we often we're waiting and waiting and waiting for that huge thing that we want to change.
Mm.
And yet we miss the beginning to the answer of the prayer, the
Mm-hmm.
beginning workings. And this is where Pastor said, God's giving you the acorn, but you're looking for the oak tree,
Mm-hmm.
not realizing that he's giving you the acorn, which will turn into the oak tree in his timing, whatever that might be. And it could be years and years and years down the road. But it's that seed that he gives us, and it's up to us to like nurture it and
Mm-hmm.
water it and do what it needs to be done to see it mature. I mean, there are times when your prayers will be answered completely immediately, but I think very often it's a slower process, and we can miss the beginning and not give thanks in all of it.
Yeah, and I wrote down, be faithfully serving as the acorn turns into the oak tree.
Mm.
So, once you recognize that, just that's where it's keeping your faith and never losing the hope. Always keep that hope for what you pray for, what you're looking, what you here you may be praying for one thing, but God is looking 10 times further than that, right? Like he
Mm-hmm.
sees, oh yeah, you want that because I've got something bigger for you. Of course you want that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've got something more grand, more important, uh, and more in line with what my plan is for you, not in line what you think my plan is for you.
Right.
But here's what I'm giving you right now, just as a seed, just as the beginning, to let you know that I'm with you and I love you and I want to walk with you through this whole process.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's like we need patience. We need patience and we need perseverance to trust in the process, because it is a process that needs to be walked out.
Mm-hmm. And that growth is in the process. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And you'll see a lot of change along the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anything you else want to add to this week? I think
Oh,
we
yeah.
I think that's a wrap. So that's a wrap for this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. Be sure to tune in each and every week to stay connected, be inspired, and keep moving toward your best life by stripping away your limitations. And we will see you back next week.
Look forward to hearing from you this week.
Yes. Thank you.